Turn to Genesis 39, if you would. And actually, I'm going to read one verse from 37. So Genesis 37, and then we'll just flip over to 39 pretty quickly. Genesis 37, the very last verse. This is when the brothers have put Joseph in the pit, and the Midianites have passed by, and they buy um, Joseph from the brothers. Verse 36. Now the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. So 37 ends with him being sold into slavery. 38 we dealt with last week. That kind of is a pause in the story because it was the life uh, of Judah and kind of the mess that he made and how God redeemed that story. And so then we jump to chapter 39, which picks up the story of Joseph, and we read verse 1. Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was, look at verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian, and his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in the master's sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had he put under his authority. So it was from the time that he made him overseer of his house and all that he had that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake, and the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. Thus he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. So, a couple of things just in this introduction, and then we will move on to the story that, again, many of you probably know fairly well. But we're back in the Joseph narrative, and that key verse, verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph. And that's going to be kind of the theological underpinning of this whole narrative for Joseph. He is going to go to some rough places, but the Lord is going to be with him. That's not an insignificant line. The Lord is going to be with him in the pit, in the prison, in the throne room. He is going to be near to him through it all. Joseph's situation is going to change multiple times in this story, even the story today, but God's relationship to him will not change. And again, let me just make a quick sidebar. Our situations change often, don't they? We go from the mountaintop to the valley. We go from the pit to the throne room. We go through the hardship to the victory, but the Lord's relationship doesn't change. The Lord was with Joseph, and the Lord is with us. Amen. All right, so this is really important. Joseph is going to rise, he's going to fall, he's going to rise over and over. And these situations would have crushed others, but Joseph, because he knows the Lord is with him and that he is in the will of God, Joseph will be sustained. A couple of other little things that I want you to notice before we really jump into the story. Potiphar is his boss, slave master, and Potiphar notices Joseph's life. He notices his faithfulness. By the way, again, little sidebar, wherever God puts us, we need to be faithful, because when we're faithful there, God sees that and he blesses us in the next situation. Joseph did not walk around whining about what his brothers had done to him, but he said, this is where I'm at and I'm going to work hard. And when he worked hard, Potiphar noticed how hard he was working and noticed that his house was getting blessed. You know, everything Joseph seemed to put his hands to God blessed. And so Potiphar's thinking, I like this guy in my house because I'm more blessed than I've ever been. And it was because God was blessing Joseph in a difficult situation. And therefore, Potiphar was getting the residual effect of that. He's given this great position by Potiphar. And the description of that position in verse 6, Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's hand. He didn't even know what he had except for the bread which he ate. He so trusted Joseph that the only thing he knew was that there was toast every morning, all right, that he could have for he didn't know where anything else was. He just that's how much that's an important statement. That's how much he trusted Joseph. Now we get to verse 7. Oh, by the way, there's a little bit more in verse 6 because it's the segue into the story. Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. All right. He was, as some would say, a hunk, I guess. All right. How else to say it? But if you're gonna get this story, you need to understand he could do a lot of push-ups. Okay. That's what I'm saying. So it came to pass after these things, verse 7, that his master's wife, Potiphar's wife, cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said, lie with me. So now the mistress of the house becomes enslaved by lust for her husband's slave. All right. So there's a little irony going on here. She casts longing eyes on him and she can't get him out of her mind. And she says, lie with me. In Hebrew, that's just two words, and it is never used in regard to a marriage relationship. It's always a Hebrew word that describes something that is outside of the marital relationship. So she's inviting him to an illicit relationship. Um, in verse 8, but he refused, and he said to his master's wife, look, my master does not know what is with me in the house. He has committed all that he has in my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Now, she has this very short and rather brute proposition, lie with me. All right. He returns with a long speech that screams of his noble character. He said, I will not abuse the trust that my master has put in me. He's given me everything. He doesn't even know what he has. He doesn't know how much money he has in his bank account. He doesn't know how many servants he has. He doesn't know how much cattle he has. He has trusted me, and I am not going to abuse that trust that he has given to me. So he gives this long speech. He talks about how grateful he is, and he understands marital rights. He said, the only thing he hasn't given to me is you. You belong to him. And he also understands that to sin would have been a sin against God. So Joseph has it. He understands and he responds in a very powerful way. But she won't quit. Verse 10, so it was as she spoke to Joseph day by day. So she continues to try that he did not heed her, to lie with her, or to be with her. So she tries to wear him down. And in verse 11, um, let me read, yeah, verse 11. Um, but it happened about this time when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men in the house was inside, that she caught him by his garment, saying, again, lie with me. But he left his garment in her hand. And he fled and he ran outside. And so it was when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled outside that she called to the men of the house and she spoke to them. See, he has brought in to us a Hebrew to mock us. He came in to me to lie with me. And I cried out with a loud voice. And it happened when he heard that I lifted my voice, that he cried out, my voice, and cried out, that he left his garment with me and he fled and he went outside. So she caught him by the garment. By the way, that is a phrase that is always used for in Hebrew when a woman is taken by, raped by a man. And this is the only time that it's in reverse. She went after him. She caught him by the garment. He ran out and she hung on to the garment, and so then she screams. You get the picture. She acts like she's the one that's been violated. She screams. Men run into the house and she says, "My husband brought this Hebrew in and trusted him, and now he has tried to violate me." Um, and interestingly, she uses his garment to bolster her deception with her husband. Remember the garment of his father, all right, that he had given him. I mean, Joseph is always caught up in this, all right, in this garment motif. He has this coat of many colors that the brothers say to the dad, "Look, there's blood all over it. Doesn't it belong to?" And remember Judah having his signet ring and cord taken, and so she's got a piece of evidence that she shows to her husband and to the men there, and to accuse Joseph. And she reverses the details of the story. It was not, obviously, he did not pursue her, she pursued him. So, verse 19, um, Potiphar gets home. When his master heard the words that his wife spoke, that's when Joseph's master heard Potiphar speak to his wife, heard what his wife said, saying, "Your servant did to me after this manner." uh, Potiphar's anger was aroused. And then Joseph's master took him and put him in the prison house, a place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. Now, interestingly, you can do with this what you want, but the word anger is ambiguous in the Hebrew, and we don't really know who he was angry at. Um, we don't know if he was angry at Joseph or if he knew how his wife was. He trusted Joseph, and he had to do the right thing by the men that were there. And there are some that suggest that his anger was actually toward his wife, or at least toward the fact that he had lost this really capable man who had run the place for him. And so there is this anger in Potiphar. Rape was a capital charge, but he put him, this is interesting, he put him in the king's prison right next to his own house because he was the king's main servant. And this was the best of prisons, which shows he may not have really believed his wife. He may have, like, almost, text doesn't say it, but almost whispered to Joseph, "Joseph, I don't have a choice here. I'm pretty sure you didn't do it, but she's ticked, and I've got all these guys around me. So I'm not going to do what I could do by the law, and I'm going to put you in the coziest, cushiest prison we've got, and it's going to be right next door to me." Now, again, that's speculation. I don't want to. The Hebrew is a little bit difficult to decipher sometimes, but there's enough evidence there to suggest that may have happened. Um, it may have just been, and I'm fine with that, just divine favor. It may have just been God said, I even in your trouble, I'm going to bless you. But this is where he gets placed. Now we look at verse 21, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy. So the favor continues. So in prison, now remember, he was in a pit, and then he became the biggest big shot in Egypt, all right, or the servant to the biggest big shot in Egypt, and now he's in prison. So this is kind of a roller coaster. Um, and so in verse number Yeah, whatever that verse was. In verse number 21, um, so it was when his master, verse 19, heard the words. No, we already did that. Verse 21, the keeper of the prison committed to, okay, the Lord was with him. Verse 21 was with Joseph, and he showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prisoner of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. And notice, same thing happens here. And the keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. Even in prison, he gets trusted as the best prisoner. And so he said, you know what? You look like a guy that knows how to be in charge. So you take over. And he totally trusted Joseph. So he's trusted in Potiphar's house, and now he's trusted in the prison as well. The suffering is not removed, but God, look, listen, but the Lord was with him. Verse 2, the Lord is with him even here. The suffering's not removed, but he still has the favor of God. Potiphar's wife, just a little sidebar, saw a male that would satisfy her lust, but the keeper of the prison saw one who was responsible and trustworthy. And he said, Joseph, I'm putting you in charge. Now, chapter 40, and we're whether we can finish or not has more to do with how fast I can read than anything, okay? Because we're going through this story, and again, it's pretty self-explanatory. But if you know the story, it's fun to hear again. If you don't know the story, it's fascinating. So let's just work our way through it. So it came to pass after these things that the butler and the baker and the candlestick. No, the candlestick maker was not there. The butler and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the butler and the baker, chief butler and the chief baker. So he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the prison, the place where Joseph was confined. Um, and the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them. So they were in custody for a while. So now Joseph, this day starts. He gets up in the morning. He does what he always does, and there's two new prisoners, and they get their ID, and the prison leader says to Joseph, "You're in charge of them. Meet Mr. Butler and meet Mr. Baker. They both have offended Pharaoh, and so they have to do their time here." Now, by now, Joseph has actually been in slavery and prison for over 10 years. Total time in prison is going to be 13 years. He's been there a while. And so the butler is the cupbearer to the king. Nehemiah was a cupbearer to the Persian king. And oftentimes the cupbearer or butler, they were wealthy and they were influential, but their job was to drink the wine. If somebody brought wine to the king, the butler would drink the wine first to make sure that somebody had not put poison in the wine, because many times leaders were the targets, and the king might have been a target. How would you like that job? It's like, I'll drink it. If I die, don't you bother. Okay. That's what his job was. So they often, that's what Nehemiah did. That's what the butler did. And so the cupbearer was to protect Pharaoh from poison. The baker was the head guy in the kitchen. And the prison house under the warden was actually on the estate of the captain of the guard, which was what Potiphar was. So we're talking about, this is close proximity to Pharaoh. Joseph is accountable to the captain of the guard, who is his original boss. He's still answering to Potiphar, and Potiphar so trust. Now think about it again. This kind of plays into the Potiphar may not have believed his wife narrative, because even though he couldn't explain to his wife why he kept Joseph in the house, he still gave Joseph the best job, and he kept him very close to him. All right. So now Joseph is in charge. We have two new prisoners, verse 5. The chief butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, had a dream, both of them. Each man's dream in one night, and each man's dream with its own interpretation. Joseph came into them in the morning and looked at them and saw that they were sad. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in the custody of the Lord's house, saying, "Why do you look so sad today?" And they said to him, "We each had a dream, and we have no idea what the dream meant. We can't interpret it." So both of them were sad. You will remember that scripture says interpretations. I think it was Daniel that said that, and Joseph may repeat it, but interpretations belong to God. And and so they were outside of the covenant. God is Yahweh. They were outside of the covenant, and the butler and the baker both have dreams. They're sad because there is no interpretation for it. And so Joseph says, don't interpretations belong to God? Again, that statement of Daniel as well. And he says, tell them to me, please. I want to hear them. And so the chief butler begins with told his dream to Joseph and said to him, behold, in my dream there was a vine before me. And in the vine there were three branches. It was as though it budded, these three branches, its blossoms shot forth, and its clusters brought forth grapes. And then Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, and I pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph said to him, that's easy. Here's the interpretation of that. The three branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh is going to lift up your head and restore you to your place, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand according to the former manner when you were his butler. So he says that dream's easy. Those three branches with the buds and the grapes, three branches of 3 days, the grapes you squeeze into Pharaoh's cup. All that means is you only got 3 days more in here. 3 days later, you're going to go right back to your old job and you're going to be putting wine in the cup for the Pharaoh, for the king again. And then there's this little caveat in verse 14 um, where Joseph says, but would you please remember me when it's well with you? And please show kindness to me and make mention of me to Pharaoh. By the way, I just did you a favor, Joseph says. So when you get restored, put in a good word for me. That's what he's saying. Just put in a good word for me to Pharaoh. Um, and show kindness, make mention of me to Pharaoh, and get me out of this house. And he tells this story. I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews, and I've done nothing here that should put me in this dungeon. So Joseph says, just remember me because my whole life really hasn't been fair. I got sold into slavery and now I'm in prison for something I didn't do. So make sure you let Pharaoh know. So then we get to verse 16. And so just kind of picture this. You've got the butler and the baker, and they both have dreams. And the butler says to the baker, hey, don't be so sad. I I had a dream and he told me what it was. And in 3 days, I'm gonna be cut loose and back working. And so verse 16, when the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said to Joseph, I also had a dream. Let me tell you my dream. He's waiting for his good response. And there were three white baskets on my head. And the uppermost basket were all kinds of baked goods. That would make sense for the baker. Um, they were baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds ate them out of the baskets on my head. That should have been his first clue, but it wasn't. All right. So Joseph answered and said, this is the interpretation of it. The three baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift not up, but off your head and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh from you. How many know the baker wished he had not asked? Okay. Came to pass on the third day, verse 20, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all of his servants. He lifted up the head of the chief butler, that is, he restored him. And he restored the chief butler to the butlership again, and he placed the cup in his hand, but he hanged the chief baker. as Joseph had interpreted. And look at verse 23. Yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but he forgot him. Man, he told him good news, and instead he forgets him. So two dreams. Baker, his life is taken just as the dream said. The insensitivity of the butler is inexcusable here, um, and um, he forgets Joseph altogether. Michael, it is. You tell that to Joseph the day after the butler forgot him. I know, Michael, that you would have sat there in that prison and been completely patient, singing Kumbaya, and Lord, I know you're going to deliver me at your time. But the rest of us are human, okay? Just so you understand. I get it, but we have the ability to read back into that. You're talking about this, they don't even have the law yet. Moses had, and so that's the, mhm. They didn't have that line back then. I just want you to know, so you know. All right. All right, chapter 41. Um, and it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream. And behold, he stood by the river. Suddenly there came up out of the river 7 cows, fine looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up out of after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt. And they stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine, looking at fat cows. So Pharaoh awoke. He slept and dreamed a second time. Suddenly, 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 thin heads, blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and full heads. So Pharaoh awoke, and indeed it was a dream. It came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all of its wise men, and Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them for Pharaoh. So now um, Joseph's been in prison after 2 more full years and has been forgotten. And Pharaoh has this dual dream. All right. It was two different dreams. One was 7 good cows, 7 skinny cows, and the skinny cows ate the fat cows, and 7 thick grains of or stalks of grain, and 7 pitiful ones, and pitiful ones devoured the thick ones. And so Pharaoh says he wakes up next morning. We got to get an answer to this dream. So he calls for all the the soothsayers and the magicians and the diviners and the wise men, if you will, the magi kind of thing, and says, I had this dream. Please tell me what it was. And none of them in Egypt knew. Verse 9, and then it was like a light bulb came on in the chief butler. He's taking a glass of wine to Pharaoh, who's a little upset because nobody can interpret his dream. And he said, oh, I was supposed to tell you something 2 years ago, but I met this guy in jail that can interpret dreams. All right. So the chief butler spoke to Pharaoh and said, I remember my faults this day when Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, both me and the chief baker. We each had a dream one night, he and I. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. And there was a young Hebrew man with us there, servant of the captain of the guard. And we told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each man, he interpreted according to his own dream. And it came to pass just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me to my office, and he hanged him. So he remembers Joseph and he tells Pharaoh, verse 14. Pharaoh then sent and called for Joseph, and they brought him out quickly out of the dungeon and he shaved, he changed his clothing, and he came to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I've had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it, but I've heard it said of you that you can understand a dream to interpret it. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer to peace. So Joseph is summoned. Um, he would have, in this case, shaved his head and his face. Egyptians were most normally clean shaven. Um, and Joseph, notice how humble he is. Yes, I've interpreted dreams, but I don't take credit for it. It's God that's going to give the answer. So then, verse 17, and I'm going to read this quickly because he's just reiterating. Pharaoh says to Joseph, I had this dream and stood on the bank of the river, 7 cows. They were fine and fat. And then there were 7 other cows, poor and ugly and gaunt, such ugliness as I have never seen. I love that line. In all the land of Egypt. I don't know why. I just think it's funny. These are the ugliest cows I've ever seen. All right. And and verse 20, and the gaunt and ugly cows ate up the first 7 fat cows. And when they had eaten them up, no one would have known that they had eaten them. They were just as ugly as at the beginning. So I woke, and then I also saw my dream, and there were 7 heads that came up on one stalk, full and good, and 7 heads withered, thin, and blighted by the east wind sprang up after them, and the thin heads devoured the 7 good heads. So I told this to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. And Joseph then says to Pharaoh, you didn't really have 2 dreams, you had one. God has shown Pharaoh what he's about to do. 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 thin and ugly cows, which came up after them, are 7 years, and the 7 empty heads blighted by the east wind are 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh that he is what he's about to do. 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt, but after them 7 years of famine will arise. And all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will deplete the land. So the plenty will not be known in the land because of the famine following, for it will be very severe. And the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice, because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. So he says to him, let me just summarize, that really wasn't 2 dreams, it was one, but God repeated it 2 different ways to make sure you got it. And here's what's going to happen. There's going to be 7 really good years, and there's going to be 7 really bad years. Good years, plenty. Bad years, famine. But the bad years are going to outweigh the good years so much that you would even know that there were ever any good years, because that's how drastic this famine is going to be. Verse 33, he then gives some advice. Now, therefore, let Pharaoh select. Here's what Joseph says. Here's what I would do if I were you. I would select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years, and let them gather all the food of those good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. Then that food shall be as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land may not perish during the famine. So, very simply, Joseph said, take 20% of the food and store it up during the 7 good years, so that you will have food left over for the 7 bad years. Just find somebody that can administrate this, somebody with the gift of administration who can make this happen. That is my advice to you. To which Pharaoh responds in verse 37. The advice is good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? And Pharaoh said to Joseph, inasmuch as God has shown you all of this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I've set you over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh took his ring off. He put it on Joseph's hand. He put him in garments of fine linen. He put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried out before him, bow the knee. So he set him over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh. Without your consent, no man may lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath Paneah, and he gave him a wife, Asenath, and the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On. So Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. So the king, Pharaoh says, man, that is a great idea. And I think you're the guy. So I'm going to put you in charge. Here's my ring. You can stamp decrees. Here's my cloak. You got the second chariot. The only thing, just like what Potiphar said, the only thing Potiphar said, I don't even know what I have except the bread I eat. And Pharaoh says, I don't even know what I'm in charge of except the throne. I there's one person above you, and that's me. And but you are in charge of all of it. What a fascinating story. We just stopped there. That's a fascinating story. Remember the dreams that he had at 17 when he told his brothers, and he just ticked them off even more. And he was kind of being a smart aleck about it. And he ends up in a pit, and then he ends up being a big shot in the house, and then he gets falsely accused, and he gets thrown in prison, and then he has a good day and interprets a couple of dreams, but now he gets forgotten. And now, once again, remember, rise, fall, rise, fall. But verse 2 of chapter 39, but the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with them in all of these ups and downs. Verse 46, Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh, and he went throughout all the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years. The ground brought forth abundantly. So he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, and he laid up food in the cities. He laid up in every city the food of the fields which surrounded them. Joseph gathered very much grain, as the sand of the sea, until he stopped counting, for it was immeasurable. It's interesting. He was 17 when he was sold into slavery. Spent 10 years in slavery in prison, 2 years forgotten, and now he's 30 years old and he is in charge. What a powerful story. Verse 50. This is not insignificant. Um, Joseph and to Joseph were born two sons before the years of famine came, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On, bore to him. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, which means God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. The name of the second is he called Ephraim, for God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. Both powerful names. I mean, this is a story of restoration. He names his child, the Lord has caused me to forget all of my hurt and all my pain. And Ephraim, the Lord has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Again, let me just pause pastorally and say, we are people that should not flip out, freak out, quit, get discouraged, whine, complain when we have ups and downs, because the Lord was with Joseph and the Lord is with us, and the Lord will bless us even in our land of affliction if we will allow him. Sometimes we miss the blessing because we are too busy focusing on the affliction. Joseph kept his chin up, and Joseph was worked hard everywhere. He didn't like being in prison, but he knew that God was superintending his life. And so he was faithful. It's a great story of faithfulness, even when we are places we don't like. And can I just be real practical? And I'm talking to a group of people who's probably lived your life this way. Many of you are retired. Many of you have been places and jobs in your early years that weren't your favorite job in the world. It wasn't, and it wasn't your favorite job in the world. And and it's like, why am I here? This is what I want to do. But you worked hard and you were faithful, and God blesses you. It's a principle that just works. It's the faithful with the little things. You become faithful over much. It's doing everything with all your might as unto the Lord. It's not grumbling and complaining. This isn't what I signed on to. It's just being faithful where you're at and believing and trusting that the Lord's timetable may not be like yours, but he's watching all the time. Do you believe that? He's watching all the time and ultimately honors and blesses us. Now, the story gets really fun in chapter 42. Actually, look at verse 53 of 41. The dream becomes reality. There's 7 years of plenty. Um, we're in the land of Egypt. Those years ended. And the 7 years of famine came. And Joseph had said the famine was in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. So everywhere around them, they had nobody talking about that wisdom. So Egypt's the only one prepared. All right. They still have bread. Everybody else is starving to death. But Egypt has bread because God placed Joseph there. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, go to Joseph, whatever he says to you do. Famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians. And the famine became so severe in the land of Egypt, so all the countries came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain because the famine was so severe in all the land. So now we go to chapter 42. All right, so over in Egypt um, is this guy named Joseph who 13 years before got sold by his brothers, and his dad thinks he's dead. And they're living in a land far away, and they are starving to death because the famine is over all the earth. Chapter 42, when Jacob saw, now we're back to the family. Now we're back in Canaan. Joseph's in Egypt doing his job. All right. He's got a clean shaven face, and he's got jewelry, and he's got a cloak, and he's not doesn't look like he's 17 anymore. He's 30. And and now we're back in Canaan, this dysfunctional mess. Jacob saw that there was no grain, or when Jacob saw there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, why do you look at one another? And he said, indeed, I've heard that there's grain in Egypt. So go down to that place and buy for us there that we may live and not die. So Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt, but Jacob would not send Benjamin, for he said, lest some calamity befall him. And the sons of Israel, the sons of Jacob, went to buy grain among those who journeyed, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. So the brothers, 10 of them, minus Benjamin, um, and again, there is such dysfunction. I mean, why? Even that first verse, Jacob looks at his brothers. Why are you guys looking at each other? They're just kind of like, what do we do? You know that they're not the brightest bunch. I mean, seriously, that's kind of what that's saying. There's the discerning one they threw into a pit, and he's running the show in Egypt, and all these guys have done to make a mess of things, and they're just looking at it like, I don't know what to do. And Jacob said, guys, come on. Heard there's food in Egypt. Why don't you go there? But he would not let Benjamin go. All right, that's important to the story because he'd already lost Egypt or already lost Joseph. And these are the two sons of Rachel, his most loved wife, right? And he's already lost Joseph, and he's not going to lose Benjamin. And so we get to verse 6. So Joseph was the governor over the land, and it was he who sold to all the people of the land. And now Joseph's brothers show up. They came and they bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. And Joseph saw his brothers and he recognized them. But he acted like a stranger to them and he spoke roughly to them. And then he said to them, where did you come from? And they said, from the land of Canaan to buy food. So Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Again, he is clean shaven. They have long beards. They're Hebrews. He's clean shaven. Last time they saw him, he was 17. Now he's 30. You know, he's weathered a little bit. And they didn't recognize him. Verse 9, then Joseph remembers the dreams which he had dreamed about. And he said to them, this story is kind of fun because he plays with them for like 3 or 4 chapters. All right. I don't know if we'll cover it all today or not, but we will eventually. You are spies, he said. You've come to see the nakedness of the land. And they said to him, no, my Lord, but we are your servants. We've come to buy food. We all belong to one man. We're all one man's sons. We're honest men. And so funny. And your servants are not spies. But he said to them, no, but you've come to see the nakedness of the land. And they said, your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And in fact, the youngest is with our father today. And then they spill the beans, and one is no more. Um, no, sir, we're not, we're not spies. We are honest men. We all belong to one father. He has 12 sons. One of them is with him. One's already dead. And what you see, we are the 10 that are left. It's a powerful, powerful story. And Joseph remembers the dream. So in verse 14, Joseph said to them, it is as I spoke to you, saying, you're spies. In this manner, you're going to be tested by the life of Pharaoh. You shall not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you and let him bring your brother, and you shall be kept in prison, that your words may be tested to see whether there is any truth in you, or else by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies. So he put them all together in prison for 3 days. Just imagine when they are in prison saying, I knew we should not have done that thing. God is paying us back. And imagine Joseph going home and telling his wife, honey, there's something I need to tell you about my upbringing. All right. And he tells her the story. And now I got those 10 sorry rascals in jail for 3 days. Okay. That's what's going on here. All right. So, verse 18, verse 18, then Joseph um, said to them the third day, do this and live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers be confined to your prison house, but you go and carry grain for the famine of your houses. And bring your youngest brother to me, so your words shall be verified, and you shall not die. And they did so. And then they said to one another, we are truly guilty concerning our brother, for we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear. Therefore, this distress has come upon us. And Reuben answered them, saying, did I not say to you, do not sin? Here we go. They're pointing finger. I told you guys not to do that, and you wouldn't listen. Therefore, behold, his blood is now required of us. But they didn't know that Joseph understood them. They're saying all of that in front of a guy they think doesn't speak Hebrew. They think he's an Egyptian. And they're saying all of this. And Joseph is loving every second of this. All right. And he turned, but well, he turned himself away and wept. Uh, God is working in his heart. He returned to them again and he talked with them. So he took Simeon from them and he bound him before their eyes. So Simeon is imprisoned, and the rest are going to go back, and they're supposed to go back and get Benjamin, and then they're going to bring Benjamin. That's what he's asking. And then when I see that this whole story's true, I'll let you guys go. So, so Joseph gives a command in verse 25 to fill their sacks with grain, to restore every man's money to his sack. In other words, they came with lots of money. So Joseph said to his servant, here's what I want you to do. I want you to fill their bags with grain, but down at the bottom of it, stuff their money back in there. Give them provisions for the journey. Thus he did for them. So they loaded their donkeys with the grain and they departed from there. But as one of them opened his sack to give his donkey feed at the encampment, he saw his money, and there it was in the mouth of the sack. So he said to his brothers, my money has been restored, and there it is in my sack. And their hearts failed them, and they were afraid, saying to one another, what has God done to us? In other words, they're saying that they got down the road and they're going to feed their animals, and they get in their sack, and there's their cash. And they're thinking as soon as they reconcile their books, they're going to know we did not pay them. We stole the money back. They're going to come after us in hot pursuit like Roscoe Pico, and they're going to be after me. And so they're all nervous about this. Um, Again, question is he playing with them or is he being generous to them? I would suggest maybe a little of both. Verse 29, so they went to Jacob, their father, in the land of Canaan. And they told him everything that happened to them, saying, the man who's Lord of the lands, he spoke harshly to us, Dad. And he thought we were spies. Um, but we said to him, we were honest men. And I'm sure Jacob said, I think we're all lying a little bit when we say that. Um, we told him we're 12 brothers, sons of our father. One is no more, and the youngest is with our father this day. And then this man who's in charge said, by this will I know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me. Take food for the famine of your households and be gone. And bring your youngest brother to me so that I shall know that you're not spies, but that you're honest men. And I will grant your brother to you, and you may trade in the land. It happened as they emptied their sacks, they surprisingly, each man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when they and their father saw the bundles of money, they were afraid. And Jacob, their father, said to them, you have bereaved me. Joseph is no more. Simeon is no more, because he's in jail back in Egypt. And you want to take Benjamin? All these things are against me. Reuben spoke to his father, saying, kill my two sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my hands, and I will bring him back to you. And Reuben says, listen, Dad, I promise you, you know I'm good for my word. I mean, never mind the fact that I slept with your handmaid, all right? All that stuff going on. Trust me, and I will bring the boys back to you. But he said, my son shall not go down with you. Benjamin's not, for his brother is dead and he's left alone. If any calamity should befall him along the way in which you go, then you'd finish me off. You'd bring down my gray hair with sorrow to the grave. So father says, no, we're just going to eat this food and just write Simeon off, but not writing Benjamin off. All right. So we get to 43. Famine is severe in the land, and it came to pass when they had eaten up, now they're out of food again. When they'd eaten up the grain, um, which they had brought from Egypt, that their father said to them, you got to go back and buy us some food. And Judah spoke up and said, but Dad, they warned us, you'll not see my face unless your brother is with you. If you send our brother with us, we'll go down and buy you food. But if you'll not send him, we're not going to go down. The man said to us, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. So um, Jacob says, we've got to go get food. And Judah says, Dad, they're not going to see us unless we take Benjamin. And then Israel, Jacob, verse 6 said, why do you deal so wrongfully with me as to tell the man whether you had still another brother? But they said, the man asked us pointedly about ourselves and our families, saying, is your father still alive? Have you another brother? And we told him, according to these words, could we possibly have known that he would say, bring your brother down? So in case you didn't miss it, Jacob is saying, why in the world did you knuckleheads tell him that there was a son still in the first place? So you see the blame game going on. Well, Dad, how could we have known? He just asked us, it was just like a questionnaire, and we just answered his questions honestly, because Dad, you raised us to be such honest boys, and we thought we would tell them everything. And verse 8, Judah said to Israel, his father, send the lad with me. Remember, Judah's the one in chapter 38 that we just talked about last week that, tried to cheat his way out of, cheat Tamar out of a husband, and ends up taking her, thought was a prostitute, and he ends up, you remember the story. So this is Judah, and Dad trusts me, and I myself will be surety for him. And from my hand you shall require him. If I don't bring him back, you can kill me, and let me bear my blame forever. For if we had not lingered, surely by now we would have returned the second time. And what he's simply saying is, we're out of food, we're going to die. They're not going to see us unless we take Benjamin. We can sit here and argue and point fingers. We could have been there by now. And so Judah has a little bit of wisdom here. Let's just kind of like the four lepers. Why sit we here till we die? Let's do something. And their father said to them in verse 11, if it must be so, then do this. Take some of the best fruits of the land in your vessels, carry down a present for the man, a little balm and a little honey, spices and myrrh, pistachio nuts and almonds. Take double money in your hand. Take back in your hand the money that was returned in the mouth of your sacks. Perhaps it was an oversight. Take your brother also, and arise, go back to the man, and may God Almighty give you mercy before the man, that he may release your other brother and Benjamin. And now it's just kind of, it's que sera, sera. If I am bereaved, I am bereaved, but we've got to try. So the men in verse 15 took that present and Benjamin. They took double money in their sacks. And they rose and they went down to Egypt, and they stood before Joseph. And when Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of the house, take these men to my home, slaughter an animal, make ready, for these men will dine with me at noon. And then the man did as Joseph ordered, and the man brought the men into Joseph's house. Men were afraid because they were brought into Joseph's house, and they said, is it because of the money which was returned in our sacks the first time that we are brought in, so that he may make a case against us and seize us to take us as slaves with our donkeys? And when they drew near to the steward of Joseph's house, they talked with him at the door of the house and said, oh, sir, we indeed came down the first time to buy food, but it happened when we came to the encampment that we opened our sacks, and there each man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight. So we brought it back in our hand, and we brought down the other money in our hands to buy food. We do not know who put the money in our sacks. Verse 23, but the man said, peace be with you. Don't be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money. Then he brought Simeon out to them. Simeon's been in prison the whole time. Um, so they go down, um, and they are afraid because they've been invited to the house. They meet the servant. And they said, listen, you got to know what happened. We got home and we had money, and I don't know who put it in there. He said, don't worry about it. I had your money. Evidently God just blessed you. And so he gives them some assurance. So now we are in verse 24. This is so good. I'm not probably going to quite finish, but we'll pick it up next week. Um, verse 24. So the man brought the men into Joseph's house, and he gave them water. They washed their feet, and he gave them their donkeys' feed. And then they made the present ready for Joseph's coming at noon, for they had heard that he would eat bread there. So when Joseph came home, they brought him the present which was in their hand into the house, and they bowed down. So here they are bowing down before Joseph, all right, aka the dreams, all right. And he asked them about their well being. Is your father well? The old man of whom you spoke, is he still alive? And they answered, your servant, our father, is in good health. He is still alive. And they bowed their heads down and they prostrated themselves. So they are now in the room together. And in verse number, we'll keep going, verse 29, he lifted up his eyes and he sees Benjamin, his mother, who's now passed, son. He says, is this your younger brother of whom you spoke to me? And he said, God be gracious to you, my son. And now his heart yearned for his brother. So Joseph had to run. He had to make haste, and he sought somewhere to weep. And he went into his chamber and he wept there. Can we just for a moment think about Joseph is starting to say, oh my goodness, this was all part of God's plan. Now I see my brother and he's weeping and his heart longs for him. He has to get away. he composes himself, verse 31, washes his face, and he came out and he restrains himself and he says, serve the bread. So they set him a place by himself and them by themselves. And the Egyptians, because the Egyptians and Hebrews could not eat together, the Hebrews were shepherds, and that was considered filthy to the Egyptians. The Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat with the Hebrews, that's an abomination. Verse 33, and they sat before him the firstborn according to his birthright. So they're around the table. Firstborn is first, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked in astonishment at one another. They looked in astonishment at one another because Joseph said, here's how I want you to set them around the table. He knew the order of the family. And they're looking at each other like, now, wait a minute. How did he know who's who? Or is this just is this not a great story? This is such a great story. They looked at astonishment at one another. And then verse 34, he took servings to them from before him. And I love this, but Benjamin's serving was 5 times as much as any of theirs. So Benjamin gets the most mashed potatoes. Is that not just awesome? I mean, like it's heaped high. And man, I really probably should stop there because I can't make it. Only because I'm tempted, but we're gonna stop there. Okay.